Good evening, everyone. I'm Rachel Floor, Executive Director of the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation, and on behalf of Alan Price, our Library Director, and my Library and Foundation colleagues, it is my pleasure to wish you all who are here in person and watching at home a belated Happy St. Patrick's Day. Though I was reminded by one of our wonderful security guards this afternoon that St. Patrick's Day falling on a Friday means it should actually be considered St. Patrick's Day weekend. So by that calculation, I figure that we're only about halfway through the festivities. And tonight promises to be a very special occasion for all of us as we mark not only St. Patrick's Day weekend, but also the 60th anniversary of President Kennedy's visit to Ireland with our distinguished guest, Micheál Martin T.D, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defense of Ireland. We are truly honored by your presence. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge Stephen Kennedy Smith, who will be here with us this evening. Stephen's mother, President Kennedy's sister, Jean Kennedy Smith, accompanied President Kennedy to Ireland in 1963. She later served as U.S. Ambassador to Ireland and played an instrumental role in Northern Ireland peace process and the Good Friday Agreement. I would also like to acknowledge the generous support of our underwriters of the Kennedy Library Forums, lead sponsors, Bank of America and the Lowell Institute, and our media sponsor, the Boston Globe. Today's program is also supported in part through the Government of Ireland Emigrant Support Programme. Many thanks to Consulate General of Ireland in Boston and Consul General Leisha Moore, Vice Consul General Paul Rooney, and Olivia Paolo for their work in supporting this evening's program and the Kennedy Library. We look forward to a robust question and answer period tonight. If you're joining us online, you'll see full instructions on screen for submitting your questions via email or comments on our YouTube page during the program. When the Q&A starts, we'll invite those of you who are joining us in person today to proceed to the microphones here in the aisles for your questions. In this library, we tell the story of our nation's 35th president. It's a story that starts with the journey of two families, the Kennedys and the Fitzgeralds, who left Ireland during the devastating potato famine in the 1800s. All 8 of John F. Kennedy's great-grandparents arrived in Boston, not far from where we stand. They worked at first as peddlers and ditch diggers. Later, they were clerks, tavern owners, and shopkeepers. One of them rose to become mayor of the city of Boston, and his grandson became the president of the United States. President Kennedy never forgot his Irish roots. In June 1963, he returned to his ancestral homeland, a homecoming he later described as one of the most moving experiences of his life. In his address to Irish Parliament in June 1963, he said that it's the quality of the Irish, that remarkable combination of hope, confidence, and imagination, that's needed more than ever today. The problems of the world cannot possibly be solved by skeptics or cynics whose horizons are limited by the obvious realities. This, of course, remains true today, and we are especially honored to mark this occasion and to discuss the U.S.-Irish relationship with tonight's guest, Micheál Martin Tánaiste, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defense of Ireland. I'm also delighted to welcome our moderator for this evening back to the library, a great friend of the Kennedy Library, Kevin Cullen, who's a columnist for the Boston Globe, where he has served as a local, national, and foreign correspondent, and as bureau chief in Dublin and in London. He has been on 2 Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting teams and won the 2014 Mike Rocco Award as Best Columnist, chosen by the American Newspaper Society of Newspaper Editors. He will also receive the Ara Society Award in April. Perhaps not on his resume, but he also has the distinction in my life of being my former teacher and a great inspiration. Thanks, Kevin, for being here. And now, to help us welcome our distinguished guest, I'm delighted to invite Leisha Moore, the Consul General of Ireland, to New England to say a few words. In her time as Consul General, Leisha has been a thoughtful advisor, a wonderful advocate, and exceptional partner to the Kennedy Library. And she never turns down our invitations to host fun parties together. So I'd say, by all measures, she's representing her country with distinction. Thank you, Leisha.
A chorda, a gwyniwshla, friends, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you for joining us here on a weekend where we celebrate St. Patrick's Day in a city that has extraordinarily close links to Ireland, and in a year that we mark the 60th anniversary of President John F. Kennedy's visit to Ireland. I thank the JFK Library for hosting, and I'm really delighted that we are joined this evening by Tánaiste Micheál Martin. Since December 2022, Micheál Martin is the Tánaiste, or Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland, and he is also our Minister for Foreign Affairs and for Defence. Prior to this, he was our Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, from June 2020 to December 2022. He has been the leader of the Fianna Fáil political party since February 2011. He's previously served as Minister for Foreign Affairs, Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Minister for Health, and Minister for Education, and has served as Lord Mayor of Cork. He was born in Turner's Cross, County Cork, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master's degree in Political History from University College Cork. I'm so delighted that he is here with us this evening and that you have all gathered to hear from him this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Kennedy Library Tánaiste Micheál Martin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, a card go léir bhil an dúspáid an bhhuiachas a gháil de líse agus réisiile soachtan cuí agus an deis tá tu go domsa bheith sa siomh cáilúil seo chun Lord agus go háirithe a go héics seachtain lá le Pádraig. That's the Gaelic language. And I've just said to Líse and to Rachel in particular to thank you for facilitating this opportunity for me to speak in this wonderful location, this historic location. And I deem it a great privilege to be here, particularly I think Rachel talked, I think, about a day, St. Patrick's Day, or a weekend. I could tell you it's been a week for me so far. And I know Richie Neal often says that St. Patrick's Day is the longest month of the year for him. And I get to understand what he means by that statement. But more generally, ladies and gentlemen and friends, when Patrick Kennedy from Dunganstown, County Wexford, left Ireland with his fiancée Bridget Murphy during the Great Famine of the 1840s, he could not have imagined that his great-grandson would become the leader of the young new country where he was seeking refuge. Especially since he brought with him nothing but a strong religious faith and a desire for liberty, as President Kennedy famously told the people of Ireland when he returned to the land of his ancestors over 100 years later in June of 1963. It's an honour to be in this beautiful building, dedicated to the life and legacy of President Kennedy, as we in turn mark the 60th anniversary of his visit, the first of any sitting United States President to Ireland. And why does his visit continue to resonate? And I believe it is because of the values that President Kennedy stood for and for what he came to represent. Take his immigrant roots. Like many immigrants, his family cherished their links with their ancestral homeland. All 8 of his great-grandparents came from Ireland. It was, President Kennedy said, not the land of my birth, but the land for which I hold the most affection. But his is not just an Irish story. It is an immigrant story. And I'm aware of this building regularly hosts ceremonies for new citizens of the United States. It must, I think, be profoundly meaningful for them to hear how an immigrant family which came to this country with so little could in the space of a few generations rise to the very pinnacle of political life. President Kennedy has become a symbol of what is possible for immigrants in this country. President Kennedy is also a symbol of how Ireland shaped America and of how America in turn shaped Ireland. He was the first foreign leader to address our legislature, joint houses of the Oireachtas, the Dáil and the Senate. And he told us then that our two nations He said, divided by distance, have been united by history. No people ever believed more deeply in the cause of Irish freedom, he said, than the people of the United States. And no country contributed more to building my own than your sons and daughters. This year, we also mark another important anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And here I want to acknowledge the broader legacy of the Kennedy family, their public service, and the contribution of many other American politicians on both sides of the aisle to peace and prosperity on the island of Ireland. I'm thinking in particular of the enormous contributions made by Senator Ted Kennedy, Ambassador Jean Kennedy Smith, Representative Joe Kennedy II, and now Special Economic Envoy Joe Kennedy III. Because while the Good Friday Agreement belongs first and foremost to the people of Northern Ireland, it was in many ways made in America. United States politicians, business people, and the community played a vital role on the path to peaceful and just political settlement in Northern Ireland. The transformative effects of the Good Friday Agreement are hard to exaggerate. Today, Northern Ireland is at peace with a growing economy and thriving civil society where young adults have no memory of the conflict. And as we continue to work to deliver upon the promises of the Good Friday Agreement, the ongoing support of the United States remains invaluable. When he visited, President Kennedy told us that Ireland's hour had come and that her role on the global stage was to ensure peace and freedom. Ireland listened to his call. We may be a small country, but we play an active role in the world, promoting the rules-based international order. We have just completed a 2-year term on the United Nations Security Council. We are working with partners, including the United States. We advanced a number of important global issues on peace building, conflict prevention, and working to ensure accountability for serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. We see our role in the world as being shaped by our history. Our development cooperation programme assists the poorest people around the globe and has been assessed by the OECD to be among the world's most effective. Like the United States, Ireland continues to stand by the people of Ukraine, offering support to those fleeing the conflict. To date, Ireland has welcomed over 75,000 Ukrainians, which is about 1.5% of our total population. President Kennedy's great-grandparents fled a land of poverty and famine. But Ireland's relationship with the United States is no longer defined by the emigrant experience. The changes since President Kennedy's time are quite profound. In 1963, Ireland's total exports were just over $740 million. Last year, there were more than $204 billion. We have benefited, of course, from strong investment from the United States. American companies employ almost 200,000 people in Ireland. But essentially, Ireland provides a solution to many of those countries and advances its bottom line and adds value to those companies, particularly in terms of being a bridge to the European single market and to the EMEA region more generally. And also, of course, the economic relationship is a two-way street. Irish companies now operate in all 50 states and employ 110,000 people in the United States. And Ireland, with a population smaller than Massachusetts, is the 9th largest source of foreign direct investment to the United States. Our two countries now enjoy a mutually beneficial economic partnership. The relationship between Ireland and the United States, stretching back over centuries, continues to grow and evolve. We in Ireland remember President Kennedy's visit because in many ways it is a symbol of that relationship. In his short time as president, he left a profound legacy in the United States. His words and actions continue to inspire today. But on a short trip, Just 4 days in June 1963, he left a profound legacy in Ireland too. His visit to our country is woven into our collective memory. His youth, enthusiasm, wonderful oratory, and the impression he made left a lasting legacy and inspired a generation of Irish people to believe that the only limitations on Ireland were those we placed upon ourselves. His visit is a symbol of the broader relationship between our two countries, of how Ireland shaped the United States, and how the United States in turn has shaped Ireland. A symbol of our emigrant history that affected so many of our sons and daughters, of Ireland taking its place in the world to promote the values of peace and democracy, and of how our diaspora abroad has played its part in bringing peace and prosperity to their ancestral homeland. Most of all, it is a symbol of a deep connection between our two countries that stretches back generations and that strengthens even as it evolves. So on that note, I would like to wish you all here, in this, the most Irish of American cities, in a building dedicated to one of Ireland's and America's most cherished sons, a very, very happy St. Patrick's Day. Lá éile Pádraig Hunna Díobh Galéir. Garmagov. Am I back here, is it? Or?
Thank you so much for those thoughtful remarks. And it's now my honor to welcome once again you back to the stage with Kevin Cullen to explore some of these issues in more detail. Please join me again in welcoming our special guests.
Tánaiste, welcome.
Thank you.
I don't know if you remember. I remember when I went to Ireland as a young fellow, there you could literally walk into pubs and even homes, and there would be on the hearth there would be a picture of the Pope here and a picture of Jack Kennedy. Did you ever see that?
Of course, I did, yeah. And when I was running for election, when I started out, my ambition was to get my little card up and the photograph up on the mantelpiece as well. Because I reckon if they're looking at John F. Kennedy,
Yeah, you're doing okay.
I'm somewhere there just at the edge of the mantelpiece, I might have some chance, you know.
But it's hard for, I think, for Americans to understand the impact that visit had.
Yes, well, for me, I was 3 years of age at the time.
So you're out into politics.
And my parents reared us on the Kennedy visit.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go down Patrick Street in Cork, there's a shop there, Fitzgerald's Menswear, not just advertising him, but he has some beautiful iconic photographs because they were taken from the shop's upper windows and the upper floors of he going down Patrick Street. And
actually,
when I became Lord Mayor in 1992, Jean Kennedy Smith was just about to become ambassador. My wife had spotted this in the papers and said we heard she was coming to Ireland, and her first sort of visit or occasion was to the City Hall in Cork, and we unveiled a set of photographs of John F. Kennedy's visit. And what struck me that night was the number of people who gathered outside City Hall in 1992 to see Jean Kennedy Smith, almost to touch the Kennedy magic. And it's part of the folklore of Cork, as it is of Wexford, of course, where we came from, Dunganstone and so on, and all of the visits. So it really, and I was saying earlier, to me it probably was a watershed moment in terms of the modernisation of Ireland. So you have this young modern leader. Ireland's beginning to open up in the 1960s. It's putting to its past the isolationism and protectionism of the past. It's looking at free trade, open trade. And here you have this young Irish leader, so to speak, and saying to us, answer the call. And I think psychologically, that sort of his achievement in becoming president of the United States and in coming to Ireland, I think had a significant impact on the national psyche in terms of what we could achieve.
And what do you, in terms of the U.S.-Irish relationship as it evolved, you talked about it. When President Kennedy there, it really was more a sentimental journey. And right now the relationship is as peers, as the economics you talked about, the business, it's extraordinary. But again, even the development of the relationship began, and we saw it mostly in Northern Ireland, that what they call the parity of esteem was reached, and that the U.S. was able to treat Britain, it's one of its biggest allies, certainly militarily, and Ireland, one of its greatest, sources of people who built this country. There was an equality there, and that really changed. So it went from sentiment to substance in that period. Talk about that.
No question, but I think the context was what we call the Troubles in Northern Ireland. I mean, when John F. Kennedy came to Ireland, we didn't have the Troubles, so to speak, or violence, and we didn't even have the civil rights marches at that stage. They were to emerge in 68, 69, and all of the events that unfolded after that. So there was a lot of sentiment, but I think also there's that other piece I was talking about in terms of the psychological transformation that occurred, I think, because of his visit. And I think what happened then, of course, it did change because Northern Ireland forced the pace, so to speak. And there was a lot happening in America. You had some advocating for war and violence and so on. And there was a lot of work that the Department of Foreign Affairs had to do early on in the 1970s to try and change opinion. And of course, Ted Kennedy was just instrumental with the Four Horsemen in changing opinion in the United States to a more sensible, constructive approach to the constitutional path and the peaceful path. And they did enormous work. And it was President Carter's presidency was probably the first major breakthrough in terms of the State Department were very wedded to the idea that this was an internal issue for the United Kingdom. Carter broke that and the presidency became involved. And incrementally you see greater intervention until you get to the Clinton administration, where Irish America on the ground, the grassroots in New York and other places are saying to Bill Clinton, this is a key issue. And as, you have Tony Blair, you have John Major and Albert Reynolds, good personal relationships developing. And I think that whole issue of personalities aligning, if you like, empathy developing is a powerful thing in history. Right. Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair, likewise. And I think that set the scene for the Good Friday Agreement, and have no doubt that the US involvement was key to the Good Friday Agreement. I've witnessed that myself as a former Minister for Foreign Affairs, previous period negotiating the devolution of justice. Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, was directly engaged. Subtle soft power to all of the parties. And what's interesting is that the United States over time moved from the perception of being just all about Irish nationalism to being a more broad church and saying we want a resolution, greater understanding of the perspective of unionism and loyalism as well. And I think through the person of George Mitchell then, who chaired the talks, that is manifested very clearly. And he was a man of infinite patience. Because you might forget, the parties didn't meet in the same room that time. Right. And he was doing shuttle diplomacy between the parties. So
I think Ian Paisley said George was from the stable of the Kennedys, using that reference.
Yes.
I was curious, one of the great armchair questions, and historians have gone over it, what if Michael Collins lived? I'd ask you, what if Jack Kennedy lived? And Jack Kennedy, he would have, if he served 2 terms, he would have been out of the White House by the time things really blew up. But what would Jack Kennedy have done with the troubles in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think he would have been interventionist. We only have to look what Ted Kennedy did. And Ted Kennedy was amazing. Jean Kennedy Smith as ambassador. I mean, she privately held many, many dinners between different perspectives in Northern Ireland in the ambassador's residence. So what you get is an interventionist, serious, and persistent engagement, which yields results. And I've no doubt President Kennedy would have used his moral authority at that stage to try and move things on perhaps more quickly.
And I guess you could take the question further to what if Bobby Kennedy lived? And Bobby Kennedy was elected.
To me, Bobby Kennedy was I suppose, in some respects, the personification of the ultimate diplomatic strategist. I read his work on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I keep reminding myself of that, and sometimes to the annoyance of my own party members at times they think I'm being too this or too that.
Right.
I'm always looking at how the other side or the person you're negotiating with, how did they emerge from a particular difficulty they might have placed themselves in,
Right.
with a bit of honour and respect. And that's the great art of negotiation. So again, I think Bobby Kennedy would have probably brought his specific skills to the table on that. And that's kind of strategic mind to realising what we now have in the framework of the Good Friday Agreement, which is issues like parity of esteem. There can't be one side triumphing over the other. And a lot of people, you've got to give way at times. There's compromise, there's give and take. And also, I think, if you look at the speeches of both, the idea that let's bring it back to the person, let's bring it back to humanity, let's bring it back to families. And what I mean by that is that the impact of violence is horrific.
Right.
And is very traumatic on people, as we know. We're still dealing with the legacy issues today. So I think that's what the Kennedys, I think Bobby Kennedy would have brought that to the table.
Have you been to the Kennedy Summer School in Wexford?
I have.
Yeah. If you could tell this audience about I've been to it several times, and what struck me is the visit of President Kennedy is very relevant, but it also, all the issues that you talked about, the immigration, that whole sort of sense of the Irish being able to achieve, that comes out in all the other forums that they have but talk about the summer school, because it is, of all the Irish summer schools, it's pretty amazing.
It is, and to be fair to that summer school, back to your point, or maybe to contradict your point a bit, it cuts through the sentiment fairly quickly. Right. It's fairly hard-nosed, and it's very focused on policy issues and so on. And it's not a sentimental summer school not by any yardstick, and you need to go there fairly with your homework done. Right. Or you might be embarrassed by some of the and of course it was initiated by a late colleague of mine, Noel Whelan.
Yes, Noel's a friend of mine.
Who I think, to be fair, along with Brian Murphy and others, saw the importance of Wexford perhaps reflecting and having a summer school that would give justice to what was a momentous event, the visit of John F.
Brian
Kennedy.
Donnelly's nephew, Larry, is very involved at the school.
He is indeed, Larry. And of course,
so
we remember Brian Donnelly's extraordinary commitment to people. And as I've been in New York for the week, and I'm here now for these number of days, again, the Irish Undocumented and so on. And Brian Donnelly did enormous work to create opportunities for people, Irish people, in this country. And many of them owe him a great debt of gratitude.
And Brian was a Kennedy Democrat.
Yes,
he was.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, you talk about presidents building on what President Kennedy began. Every successive, I believe every president, beginning with Nixon, visited the country. So that's the other thing that struck me, is when you looked at the Ireland became a bipartisan issue in a country where there's very few bipartisan issues left. Unfortunately, it hasn't continued on with immigration, where the Republicans really don't want to have a comprehensive immigration bill, whereas the Democrats do. But I'm curious if you thought about the way that various presidents came to Ireland. Like Reagan seemed a little more sentimental, but then we find out that John Hume talks to Reagan, and Reagan talks to Margaret Thatcher, and Margaret Thatcher talks to Garrett Fitzgerald, and wow, we have an agreement. We have the agreement in 80. What was that? Not 85. Was it 80? Yeah, it was 85, I believe.
Yes, the Anglo-Irish Agreement.
Yes.
In 1985. Yeah. So, you see, I think that all these presidents are serious politicians. I mean, they wouldn't be presidents, And President Reagan, in particular, I think he had that easygoing style, good speaker, quotable quotes, and so on. Enjoyable personality in many respects. But I mean, he got things done with Russia and so on. He made historic moves on a number of fronts. So we shouldn't be that surprised that he had that impact. And of course, himself and Margaret Thatcher would have been relatively close ideologically and so on. So when the visits happen, I mean, there's a bit of talking going on as well.
Sure.
And there's politics going on, as well as all of the sentiment side of it and the public presentation of the visit, but there are real engagement. To this day, there was real engagement. I mean, in my view, President Biden's stance on the Good Friday Agreement in the aftermath of Brexit was critical. And it was a strong position he adapted very early on, saying nothing can happen that undermines the Good Friday Agreement. And that was followed through by Nancy Pelosi as Speaker and Richie Neal and the Friends of Ireland, which is bipartisan still.
Correct.
And we are very grateful to that. That sort of bipartisan approach on the Hill is essential and very important in the context of the Good Friday Agreement. I recently had met a Codel last year in Ireland, both sides coming over on the Republican side, two good trade experts, and who went to London and they went to Brussels and they went to Northern Ireland, and to get a good understanding of it, and again to reinforce the idea that, you know, in a post-Brexit world, the UK and the US, they would like to have a good relationship, but there won't be a trade deal if there's any naked undermining of, or blatant, undermining of the Good Friday Agreement. So I think that mattered, and perhaps is not appreciated as much by people, both in Ireland and maybe in the United States.
I'm sure that the Irish government appreciates it because they don't have to worry about the whim of administrations changing. The policies remain pretty steady.
Constant and consistent, yes. Yeah, it's very important, you know. And it also, I mean, the Windsor Framework Agreement now, that's positive, and it demonstrates a new trust between the United Kingdom government and the European Union, and also a different approach, a very professional approach by Prime Minister Sunak, who wanted to negotiate a resolution of all of the issues that were raised, some legitimate issues raised in terms of the operation of the protocol. There is a framework now that has been agreed that comprehensively responds to a lot of issues that unionism would have raised in the context of the operation of the protocol, and indeed other parties, nationalists and others, who felt if it can be simplified and made better, let's do it. And again, the US administration is saying, along with the European Union, there are economic opportunities now. We will remember 25 years of peace in April, but let's pivot to the next decade or two. And that's where the work of Joe Kennedy is particularly important. And I've spoken to him, and I know he's eager to get going. And in combination with the European Union and the UK government, the Irish government, we could create investment opportunities for Northern Ireland on the back of this agreement. And we should really use the 25th anniversary as a pivot point to the future, that the younger generations of Northern Ireland can really look forward to a settled economic situation, because business and investment needs political certainty and political stability. And I think the Windsor Framework does give that opportunity.
Well, the prospect of a post-Brexit trade deal with the UK gave the US government a lot more leverage on this, haven't they? I mean, coming up with the Windsor Framework, I'm sure the UK government was, one of its motives was, let's get a trade deal.
To be fair, there was a number of motives.
Sure.
I think there is a distinct difference, and I don't want to get into personalities between the Rishi Sunak's government and previous governments.
Sure. You can say Boris Johnson here, it's allowed.
I got on very well with Boris, but didn't agree with his views. And I think, look, Brexit was advanced with no real thinking in terms of how it would work in practice. I mean, they had no follow-up. There's incredibly no research. So you got all this language about we'll be doing trade deals with the world. You had a single market. You were in a single market with 450 million people, which is advantageous. But I think essentially what the British government are clear on in Europe is we have bigger geopolitical crises in the world. You have a war in Ukraine, first major war on the continent of Europe since World War II. You have the weaponization of migration. I think up to 12 million people displaced in Ukraine. You have the weaponization of energy. You have the climate change crisis. And people like Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, are looking at the bigger picture, looking down the road and saying, we need to come together in a constructive, harmonious relationship. And with an administration in the United States that is transatlantic in its orientation and is nurturing in the old school way the ties between Europe and America, it just makes logical sense. If I make just this pure logic, the US, Europe, and Britain are aligned. Yeah. That is the overriding imperative for the deal, to be fair, not just one trade deal, for it to be fair about it. And I think Europe have moved on over the last 2.5 years. On a subjective basis, I would argue that Brexit has not been a good experience. Europe are not really fearful of further exits on economic grounds. But that bigger picture is the great motivator from both sides to bring about the agreement that has been brought about.
But from this side of the Atlantic, it looks like with the bilateral relationship between Ireland and the UK has improved recently. Is that true?
Yes, it has improved. We had a British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference recently, which is one of the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement, and it was the best in 10 years. 4 British ministers turned up. We discussed energy, not just issues pertaining to Northern Ireland, but energy, technology issues and so forth. The new Northern Ireland Secretary of State has been very engaged, and Steve Baker likewise with us. Now, we may not agree on all of the issues. We don't agree on legacy, for example. The new legacy legislation, we're not happy about that, and we've made that clear, and we're working on that and engaging to try and get a pause on that. But what's important is, and this is a consistent message we give, and I think this is, again, as an objective observer, the United States are conscious of this, that what made the Good Friday Agreement was, and was an essential foundation for it, was the British and Irish governments working together as co-guarantors of the agreement. And that has to be retained. And there was, over the last 2.5 years, that was lost to some degree. So there isn't room for unilateralism in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. It will not work, and it will cause damage. And I think that is essential as the relationship is getting stronger and better, that the idea of the co-guarantor status of the Good Friday Agreement is reinforced into the future, working with the parties in Northern Ireland, of course. Because there are 3 key sets of relationships on the Good Friday Agreement: the British-Irish, the North-South, and the 2 traditions within the North. And irrespective of what happens in the future on the island of Ireland, those 3 sets of relationships will have to remain as the foundations for the future.
And obviously the other part of it was the U.S. acting as an honest broker between 2 countries that holds, as President Kennedy would say, with the highest affection. I guess we'll fast forward to President Biden's announced visit. Are there any more details on that? Because they were kind of light on details. They just said he was going to be there to mark the Good Friday Agreement.
Journalists always look for a scoop, don't you?
Exactly. Come on, Micheál.
You did it in such a relaxed tone, you only had me there for a moment.
I was setting you up, Micheál.
I nearly walked into that one, that's a matter for the President and his team.
All right. Good answer.
Could I say that we're really warmly looking forward to this, and we are chuffed by the fact that President Biden wears his Irishness on his sleeve.
More than anyone since Kennedy, really.
More than anybody since President Kennedy. And I've been at European Council meetings. I've been at summits in Madrid between NATO and Europe. And you have the President of America there, and I'm there as kind of a small member state, but inside the European Council when he came last March. He just starts off with 27 European leaders saying, Taoiseach knows I'm a great fan of Irish poets. You know the line. Not because I'm Irish, but they're the best poets. And then I get all these European leaders coming up to me saying, are you guys are really into poetry in Ireland? And you recite it like that all the time? And I said, yeah, of course we do, And he did the same in Europe. It was Heaney. And in Madrid, it was William Butler Yeats.
Yeah, exactly.
And I met him at COP26, and he's great time for us. And in the middle of all these kind of leaders looking for his sort of time, you just go up and sidle up, greetings from Ireland. And he said, come over here. Some things you can't repeat that we discuss about mutual relationships and so on like that. And, but he's very clear, and he's some great stories, and he's had a lifelong interest. I think he gets it from, he quotes his grandparents a lot.
From Scranton?
Yeah. And
you got to be in Scranton on Paddy's Day. It's crazy. Seriously.
And I think there's a values come, and when I spoke to him last year, he kind of spoke about human qualities, what he feels the Irish. We spoke about hospice care. We moved into hospice care, and he's been involved as a patron in the hospice in Mayo.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and for obvious reasons in some respects, but and we both talked about the dignity of the human being, and the importance of palliative care in maintaining that dignity or respecting that dignity as a person comes towards the end stages of their life. So I think he feels that's an Irish value, and I think that value system that was handed down kind of informs a lot of his approaches and attitudes to life in general.
But again, a Kennedy Democrat, And when you think about his visit, it sort of bridges the President Kennedy's visit, which was largely sentimental but incredibly important psychologically. And then you go to President Clinton coming in 1995. It's interesting that both President Kennedy and Bill Clinton described their visits to Ireland as like one of the most important events in their lives. Bill Clinton said it was the best 2 days of his presidency.
Yeah, well, I was there as
was.
I was education minister at the time, and Dick Riley was Secretary of State.
Right.
And I struck up a great friendship with Dick, who was close to Bill Clinton at the time. And that was a significant visit for Bill Clinton too, for a whole range of reasons. But the crowds that turned out were enormous.
Belfast was nuts.
Belfast was fantastic. And that lives long in the memory too in Ireland.
Sure.
There's great respect for Bill Clinton in Ireland and for Hillary Clinton.
And they're both going to be there.
And they're both going to be there on the anniversary.
Right.
And I can tell you, the Irish people hold the Clintons in the highest of respect for what they achieved on the peace process.
But, and again, looking at that, for President Biden, this is both sentimental because of the way he identifies with his heritage, and but he's going there for substantial reasons because of the Good Friday Agreement, which really would not have been reached if the U.S. did not get actively involved. But the other thing is, apparently he's going to see some cousins in Ballina.
He has cousins everywhere. I mean, sorry, large number of cousins in Mayo. I think there's going to be tension between Mayo and Louth.
I think so too.
And I don't know who's going to referee that one. But he's Louth, it's the Finnegans and the Blewitts.
Right.
And there's a large clan there. So I think he's looking forward to it.
If Mayo finally win in All Ireland this year, will Biden try to claim credit?
I have great respect for President Biden, but I have a conflict of interest here.
I know. I don't expect a Cork man to speak well of Mayo.
Well, I have a son on a Cork team as well at the moment.
I knew
so
that.
like that. This is getting serious.
Yes.
But he'll try everything he can, to influence
Hey, let's
it.
open this
But could I just make a point?
Sure, go.
I think President Biden is more than sentiment now here. I think I've observed, in terms of his handling of international relations, real steel and strategic judgment. And he knows the line he's walking and navigating in terms of the war in Ukraine and, in one sense, the necessity to avoid a conflagration of bigger proportions. But on the other side, to be very, very firm in resisting Russia's violation of the UN Charter and its attack on the Ukrainian people. I think we're very fortunate to have such experienced and wise leadership at this juncture in world affairs, but with no lack of backbone. I think he has substance and he has steel.
I think now is the time we want to open this to questions. So there are microphones here if people want to come down. And
Thank you, Tánaiste. I have two questions. You can choose one. Will Ireland ever join NATO? And secondly, would Fianna Fáil ever enter into a coalition government with Sinn Féin in a couple of years, if it comes to that?
Okay. On the first question, I think we meet first of all, I think we're going to initiate over time a national conversation on this. It's not a binary issue of joining NATO or not, because first of all, we have evolved our security and defence policy as part of the European Union Common Security and Defence Policy. We are militarily neutral. I don't see that changing anytime soon, which is basically defined as we're not members of any military alliance, and we don't anticipate being anytime soon. But given the new threats in the world today, cyber security, issues around undersea cables, hybrid warfare, I just referenced some of them earlier. Our health service was attacked last year in a cyber attack. So we need to look at the threats and the challenges to Ireland and the broader European Union community, and how best, in a meaningful way, do we respond. We're already we're in a partnership for peace with NATO. All across Europe, expertise is gleaned from NATO. So there's an ongoing relationship with the last 20 years in terms of expertise in certain areas. And on an issue like cyber security, you need expertise and you need to work together. So when we had the attack on our health service in the middle of COVID, and it caused enormous stress, 3 or 4 countries immediately got onto us with their experience of the Conti group and that attack. And the mantra from the experts back to me was, no one deals with cybersecurity on their own. So I stand back for that sort of, from that simplistic binary question and really look at it in a different way and through a different lens, which is, how does Ireland evolve now as members of the European Union, its strategy in the future in terms of dealing with threats that are coming our way and in terms of cooperating. Our greatest contribution is peacekeepers. And we've been the longest continuing member of the United Nations in terms of peacekeeping forces around the world, most currently in UNIFIL. We're not a military power by any yardstick, but we do need to invest significantly in defence to improve our capability. On the second question, my view is that the glue to the current government, and it's a 3-party government, and we fundamentally it's the programme for government, so policy. Policy has to be the essential foundation for a successful coalition government into the future. And we will engage, but for us, Sinn Féin's economic policies, our view, they've taken a very anti-enterprise position on many issues, particularly free trade agreements that are entered into by the European Union and other countries. So the most recent being CETA, the Canadian free trade deal, which has benefited Irish SMEs by 30% increase in trade since that deal was signed. Yet people opposed it, and Sinn Féin opposed it, and opposed it in the Dáil. So I would have a big question mark over their commitment to enterprise and a whole range of other issues. So they're not the most likely party that we would go in with because of their economic and social position. And I think they also have to deal with issues of the past. I genuinely believe that they're recreating and rewriting the past, very wrongly in my view as someone who's interested in history, with a view to justifying what were terrible atrocities and terrible acts of violence. To me, the Good Friday Agreement was a triumph of constitutional nationalism and republicanism. And the reason I say that is it's not to score points, but we saw a month ago a police officer in Northern Ireland. There was an attempted murder, and he was horrifically injured in a vicious attack. And the likelihood is that there were young people involved in that attack. People probably 2 or 3, 4, 5 years of age at the time of the Good Friday Agreement. We have to take the gun out of the narrative of Irish politics once and for all. We have to not glorify the gun. And Sinn Féin have in my view, glorified what happened in the last 30 years and haven't responded sufficiently to the victims of violence that they were responsible for. I think they need to deal with that.
Thank you very much.
Hi, we have a question from an online attendee.
Great.
What do you believe is the next major challenge for Ireland? With the job losses in IT, what do you think we should focus on?
The most immediate and biggest issue facing Irish society is the housing crisis. And we need to build houses faster and in greater numbers to deal with housing. We have full employment in the Irish economy right now. We bounced back very strongly from COVID-19. We had lockdowns which affected construction and so on. Now we are getting there. We had 30,000 houses last year, not enough. That's 10,000 more than the previous year. And we have to grow that over time. So housing is the number one priority of government, but it's the number one issue. Our population is growing fairly, it's going to go over 5 million in this census. You have freedom of mobility within Europe. We have a work permit system. Ireland is transformed in 30 years into a multicultural nation now, as opposed to the country that President John F. Kennedy would have come to. And that has been good for Ireland. Since the European Union, when the 10 member states joined in 2004, Ireland just opened its doors immediately. And there was hundreds of thousands of Europeans came into Ireland. And many companies locate in Ireland, not just for tax anymore, but they get talent in Ireland and they have access to talent. So on the technology question, the technology companies in Ireland grew employment by 30,000 in the last 2 years. And partly as a response to COVID, and this has happened globally. Many technology companies sort of said COVID has accelerated the technology revolution, but that actually didn't quite happen. So there's been about 2,500 jobs, or 2,300 lost in the last 2 years. But if you take that in the context of the 30,000, sorry, in the last 6 months, but in the context of the 30,000 whatever in the previous 2 years, that is, that's the context. So we think the technology issue needs to be looked at in perspective. We have three big priorities in government: housing, health reform, and climate change.
Thank you, Tánaiste. My name is Catherine Neal. I want to say it's great to see another Cork person up on the stage. Always great to see so many of us around the world. I'm one of the newer Irish people to make it to America, and you've given a really interesting perspective of the history of our great kind of connection between Ireland and America over the previous decades and right back through the generations. But looking forward for people in my younger generation, I'm just kind of curious, as there's so few newer Irish people coming to America, either by choice or by necessity, I'm kind of thinking, what do you see as the future relationship, and how do we grow that connection between Ireland and America?
I think the relationship will be multi-stranded. By that I mean economic, social, cultural. I think we need to work hard at developing legal channels of migration between Ireland and the United States, both ways. We did develop the graduate program, the work holiday program. I was involved in that actually as Foreign Minister with Secretary Negroponte at the time. And we just renewed that 6 weeks ago. But it's limited and it's conservative in its implementation. And given the history, the historic ties between Ireland, it is a source of frustration to me that we haven't been in a position to negotiate a basic bilateral migration arrangement in respect of that history, but also to facilitate the flow of people legally, because I'm always concerned about people coming illegally into the United States, because that can have significant consequences for people subsequently. And indeed, you meet people, you hear stories about people who are 20 years in the United States and they're illegal. So I really want to prevent any young people today getting themselves into that position, and the most effective way to do that is to create a legal channel. And the more legal sort of frameworks we can agree to employment and so on, the better. And that's what I would like to work on. But we saw in the Oscars recently, all those Irish nominations, and sort of films of great variety, shall we say, and fun. So that's going to be a strand. Music has always been a strand. So we want to really, through the consulates, and I know Alicia's working this, to really develop that cultural, and we have cultural attaches now in all of our embassies across the United States and our offices, and we have the Irish Arts Centres where we're developing as well as focal points for Irish activity. The economic is really strong, and a lot of Irish SMEs are in America creating jobs. I was with Ornua recently. I'll say recently this week. It's been 3 weeks packed into one. But Ornua are responsible for Kerrygold, the butter. But they've created 1,000 jobs in America alone in different activities. But that's the kind of stuff that's going on now. And this week we've met software companies that are bringing solutions to American companies, but they're locating in America. So the economic piece will be very, very strong. And of course, the sporting piece, I think we've Notre Dame and Navy coming to Dublin now shortly. So the more engagement and the more activities that we develop between each other, that's the future, And I think, look, there's an issue with migration policy within America. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. It's become, many people, it's not their first reflex anymore. Australia can be, or other locations. And I think that's something we need to work on.
Yeah, no, I came down through Canada, so I'm really grateful to be here. But it'd be remiss of me not to say Láféile Pádraig did as well.
And by the way, look, you're from Cork as well, So,
yeah, best county to be from, really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Tánaiste, my name is Nicholas Stone. Thank you for coming. It's an honor to be here. I just want to ask about the international role of the GAA following your announcement this week of more funding for Gaelic Park in New York. How closely do you work with Larry McCarthy on these things, and what can you do to help like further increase this role in other U.S. cities and internationally?
Well, Larry's another Corkman.
Mafia.
So we work fairly close. No, I mean, Larry's been, it's fantastic that Larry was elected president of the Gaelic Athletic Association, coming from New York. And that was, I think, a tremendous sort of affirmation of the international dimension of the Gaelic Athletic Association. What I found over the years, it's a tremendous social network in places all over the world. And it's fascinating in Asia, for example, the Asian GA Games now are a business networking operation, as well as a sporting operation, culture, just people getting opportunities to meet and engage. And in France recently, the head of the GAA club in Paris is a Frenchman. And they're teaching GAA in schools in Brittany as part of their Celtic connection. So it's been a fascinating sort of explosion of interest in Gaelic athletics, and people who are not Irish are joining up teams, and you might get 11 Irish in one team and they'll kind of enlist an Australian or an American and say, look, here's the basic rules of the game, get on there, you're corner forward, or whatever, and so on. So I think we have over a decade now been resourcing and supporting the international arm of the Gaelic Athletic Association as an important manifestation of the Irish diaspora in operation and working. And particularly in the United States, it's been very strong. This morning, I was at the Irish Cultural Centre and I met two teams playing. One actually won the 5th Division Féileann Gael in Ireland last year. So they came from Boston and won a trophy. The first ever, I think, the American under-14 team to win a trophy in the Féileann Gael, which is a massive national underage competition. And so I met last year's team and this year's team who are going over in April. And what a lovely experience for them to visit and participate in Gaelic football and hurling. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Sorry for the Dublin jacket, but best of luck to your son this year.
I don't think you're a bit sorry.
Hello, my name is Brendan Hassan. I'm an American with Irish roots, and thank you for your speech. And thank you for identifying housing as a big problem. I wish more American politicians talked about it that way. My question is, what do you think Ireland's role is in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? From what I gather, Ireland seems to be quite supportive of the Palestinians, and the United States, for whatever reason, doesn't seem interested in getting involved that much anymore. And as you know, I'm sure you know that the new Israeli government is one of the most far-right, extreme governments that they've ever had. So what do you view Ireland's role is in that peace process?
Well, our role has always been, we've been strong advocates for a two-state solution. And we genuinely want to pursue that. We've strongly argued for, our guiding light is the UN resolutions, United Nations resolutions and the United Nations framework, and the various agreements that have been agreed over the years in respect of the Israeli-Palestinian question. I've been to Gaza myself in 2009 during that war and the aftermath of that war. And I think I worry, and quite a number of like-minded countries in Europe worry a lot now about where this is going because of the composition of the Israeli government, the recent attacks by settlers on Palestinian towns and villages, and the increase in violence. 2022 was the most violent year in recent years. And it's of huge concern to us. We support UNRWA, which provides a lot of basic supports to Palestinian children and refugees, particularly in the area of education and food. So we see our role humanitarian. We want to maintain that. Politically, in really endeavouring to get things back on track towards a two-state solution. But unfortunately, what we're now witnessing really, it seems to me, is an abandonment of that objective by Israel. That's the sense we have. And there's a much more hardline position being adopted. And my fundamental view would be that I don't quite understand the strategic impulse of the Israeli government, in the sense that security I understand, and obviously the right to its state and so on. But I think ultimate security can only be achieved by ensuring harmony in the neighbourhood and harmony in the area in terms of with your Palestinians. That gives you security. Security policy on its own will never give you security. And you can't expel millions of Palestinians out of Palestine. That's not a realistic proposition. And I've often felt over the last 20 years that the voices of moderation in Palestine have been undermined by Israeli policy, and the forces of extremism. Maybe that's not the objective, but the reality, de facto reality, is the voices and the position of extremists has benefited from Israeli policy to the detriment of the moderates in Palestinian politics. Now, the Palestinian Authority needs to change as well. There needs to be significant reform within their governance system, and there needs to be elections. And we're advocating for all of that, and we're working with some like-minded states in the European Union to get a higher profile, to get a better association agreement or relationship between the EU and the Palestinian Authority. But to be honest with you, a lot of people see no immediate solution to it. Now, I welcome the work of Secretary of State Blinken recently with Jordan, Israel and others to try and just de-escalate what's going on at the moment. In Egypt have been involved, and to try and at least get tensions down and get the violence down to some limited success, and they've had that. And I think we need that sort of neighbourhood involvement with the United States to try and reduce the tensions. Because I worry a lot, and the big issue we're hearing back is that the youth of Palestine now don't feel represented, and we know where that can lead if there's not a proper sort of democratic process engaged in terms of elections to release that valve. And sometimes you might worry about the outcome in terms of results, but our experience tells us, even in Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland is a good sort of model in terms of how that was resolved over time. I mean, once the ceasefire happened in Northern Ireland, people negotiated with everybody. But the ceasefire had to happen first. And so if there's a political will, there could be a political process. I don't see the political will at the moment. And many, many people are very downbeat and somewhat fatalistic about the prospects.
Thank you. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Many happy returns.
Hi, thank you. Elizabeth Kennedy, most recently been serving as the head of strategy for the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center. So the state of Massachusetts has been very successful in the life sciences. We've had over $1 billion of investment in the industry, and obviously Ireland just has a growing life science industry. And I sort of related to the question on IT, as the tech sector, even in the US, is starting to really have quite a bit of issues. The life sciences remains to be a very strong part of the economy, particularly in Massachusetts. NIBRT is very strong, world-renowned training institute for biomanufacturing. So I wanted to know a little about the future of the life sciences in Ireland as it continues to be a growing part, an important part of the economy in the US and as well in Ireland.
Well, I'm delighted you've affirmed the role of NIBRT, because I was involved in establishing it, and I can tell you it gave me a lot of headaches at the beginning. But the biopharma scene and life sciences in Ireland is thriving, and COVID gave it a huge lift. And people like Boston Scientific or the other medical devices and so on, but they all came over, and I met many of the CEOs, and they said the great thing about Ireland during COVID, they did not lose a day's production. We had a relationship with the companies and the employees and so on. We had to keep the productive side of the economy going, and we did. But of course, medicine is a growing field. Just this week I met Pfizer's. Pfizer have massive investment also in Ireland, and they announced a 1.2 billion investment alone in their plant in Grange Castle before Christmas. And they were charting out a really exciting future in terms of the move towards more personalized medicine, particularly in the field of oncology. And again, we're in a good spot in terms of, because over the years, over 30 or 40 years, we've built up considerable expertise in the industry in Ireland, and with some very significant companies. But I genuinely say we add value. Like I said to multinationals who come to Ireland, there's no point in being here if we don't add value in terms of the quality of our workforce, FDA approval processes, which are very strong record in Ireland and so on, good experienced people who know what they're doing. And I think there's huge potential for partnership with Massachusetts Life Sciences and the Irish Life Sciences situation. And by the way, technology and life sciences are coming together, as you know, as well. And we have some very good research institutions, not just NIBRD, which gets into the nuts and bolts of biopharmaceutical manufacturing and excellence and so on like that, but the whole area of technology and the synergy between technology and medicine and personalised medicine at that. And we have the Tyndall Institute and so on, others like those who are at the forefront of all of that. So we're confident about that. We do food well as well, I mentioned that. So what are the essentials of life? Food, medicine. We're not in a bad space, but we can't be complacent about it. We've got to keep ourselves competitive.
Tánaiste, so good to see you here, and welcome to Boston.
Thank you, David.
The last time we met was at Aoife Murphy's wedding in Inchydoney, one of the most beautiful places on God's earth, Humphrey and Carmel's daughter. I wonder, I recently have put in my application because all my grandparents are Irish and born in Ireland, and I'm taking advantage of an application to become a citizen. And, you know, when you were speaking with the lovely young lady from Cork about, you know, the future of young people coming to the United States from Ireland and Ireland to the United States, I was thinking, you know, for us, this opportunity to be able to become Irish citizens because of our grandparents ends with us. And I have a lot of children. And I would love to someday be able to pass on that heritage through citizenship to them. And I don't know if it would ever be considered that for those of us who are kind of the end of the line to get citizenship might ever be extended to the families.
Yeah, Frank, Frank Doyle. Frank Doyle, yeah. I'm just delighted here, Frank.
Sure.
That was a very good wedding.
Oh my God. We had too much fun.
It was a 2-day wedding.
At least.
At least 2 days. Yeah, absolutely. And Carla's away this, she can't make it.
She's in Philadelphia, and I have her ticket.
You have her ticket.
That's
I heard
why
that.
I'm
Yeah. I heard that earlier this morning. Yeah.
But Stephen's here.
But you, let's see, Stephen.
Steve's right
Good
there.
to see you, Stephen. What I was going to say to you, basically you've thrown me a challenge. Because I said earlier about legal channels of migration and that, and you've kind of opened up not just an opportunity, but an idea that we should probably pursue more. And it's, in my view, it would be much better than some of these visas for investment kind of schemes and so on like that. So I think food for thought,
Great.
Frank, very significant food for thought. And in terms, because let's face it, we don't have the same waves of migration as we once had historically. So Ireland is quite interested in connectivity and maintaining the historic link and that sense of connectivity with Irish America and the States. So, and by the way, I just met with the Irish Pastoral Centre recently. We have to do more, you know, coming back. I don't know whether you're going to go back to Ireland and live at any time and so on like that, but you'll be more than welcome.
Depends on if Trump wins again.
I can't possibly comment on internal American politics. Yeah, I think that's a very good.
Well, if you're in Balbriggan, it's Francis J. Doyle, and I'm in the pile there somewhere. If they can just move that application up, I'd very much appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
I'll have a look at it, Frank.
Take care.
We have time for one more question. Do you have a question, sir?
Tánaiste, thank you for the fascinating evening so far. I wanted to bring a Belfast accent to the evening. And I wanted to say, really appreciate your comments, your nuanced and insightful comments, and robust comments about Sinn Féin as well, because I am from a unionist background. And I wanted to ask you, there's a perception of the strength of the economy of the Republic of Ireland. Obviously, it's very strong. You're talking about NIBRD, the life science sector. The Northern Ireland economy has been less strong for many years, decades. Will the Windsor Framework, do you think there's an opportunity to balance those economies a little better?
Absolutely. And I'm very clear about that. And speaking to Maros Sefcovic, the Vice President of the Commission, he's very keen that the Windsor Framework would be the opportunity, along with the Good Friday 25th anniversary, to say, let's not just look back 25 years, but can we use this now as a basis for investment? And he's prepared to put his shoulder to the wheel with the European Commission. The US government is. We see that in the appointment of Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy is waiting to get going. He didn't want to come whilst the political stuff was going on, because we had to avoid, and he was anxious, it was their decision, to avoid any perception that his appointment was a political one. His appointment is an economic one, and I think there's an opportunity for investor conferences, And that's why I really feel this is an opportune moment for investment in Northern Ireland economy. And I'll just say last year, before I came here for St. Patrick's Week, I was in London. And like Northern Ireland, significant investment has happened as a result of the peace process in Northern Ireland. And the financial services sector in London, we're looking at Northern Ireland and the Northwest for investment. So the potential is there, in my view. And we're interested, along working with the British government, so Europe, US, British government, Irish government, with Northern Ireland, the institutions need to be restored. And we should then really focus on the economic opportunities for Northern Ireland, because that's what the young people want. They want opportunity, they want a future, they want certainty, not just political haggling all of the time. I hope that's my...
Tánaiste, before we wrap up, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you to give a shout out to Ireland's rugby team, which completed a historic Grand Slam today.
I think it's been a fantastic tournament so far, championship, and there's tremendous resilience in the team. I mean, the last two matches were very, very tough.
Physical.
Scottish game took its toll, I think, physically.
They lost 4 starters.
I mean, they went at it for that first half. The Scottish game was just incredible. But Ireland stood their ground and came through very strongly in the end. And likewise today, that was a very, very tough, resilient, hard performance by the English team. Who, to be fair, I think went down fighting.
They did.
And they really put it up to the Irish today. But again, Ireland came through. There's real depth in the squad. And every replacement that comes on is as good as the person he's replacing, which is a real important, I think, piece as we get ready for the World Cup. But we're humble people. And we'll take it one game at a time.
Good man. Thanks, Tánaiste.
You're very welcome indeed. Thank you indeed. Thank you.
You're very good.